Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, and this is Legal Matters, the program that's designed to address some of the critical, controversial, timely issues facing consumers and businesses today. As you know, it's legal information, practical solutions, and straight talk about a wide variety of topics. And they've ranged from Social Security and finance and family law to fraud and charitable donations recently. In our last topics, our last sessions, we were discussing how people really do like to donate to charities, and of course, most recently, Haiti, and it seems that there have been many good charities, but also there have been issues about fraud and some fraudulent organizations. And I think we covered enough information that hopefully it helped our viewers make better determinations about how to give, where to give, and do it securely. So today we're going to continue our topic that's also timely, and once again we're going to be welcoming David Bazar, Audette Bazar, Cordeiro Grasso, law firm in East Providence. So David, last week you weren't here. We were talking about addressing unemployment issues, unemployment benefits, and some of the appeal process. It seems like it's an automatic issue that people are having to appeal. So,
given the economy that we have today, it's an absolutely timely topic for us to discuss.
So let's go through it. It seems that people do pay into that, the employer pays into it. Go through the process and the procedures of unemployment.
Yeah, I think we can talk about two topics in this area. First is what's the procedure, and if I don't get on, what can I do about that? And then what are the eligibility requirements? So let's talk about the first one first, which is how do I get on? Well, you're right, people pay in, their employer pays in, and now for whatever reason, let's just say they've been, what did they say in Massachusetts?
Massachusetts has a great phrase, how you are being separated from your job. And I assume that that means whether you're fired, you're laid off, you're reduced hours, you quit, whatever.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, that's exactly right. You're separated from your job because you don't have to be laid off necessarily to be eligible to collect unemployment. You're separated from your job. So you've been separated from your job. In Rhode Island, what would happen is you'd file a claim for unemployment with what's now called the Department of Employment and Training. I think
DLT.
at one time it was Department of Employment Security. And interestingly enough, the whole unemployment statute was passed in Rhode Island in 1936, which was another time of economic despair. And it was passed to, as they said in the statute, lighten the burden on the unemployed worker and his family. It's interesting they said his family back then.
Yes.
Obviously we know the employment world has changed since 1936. So that's how you start the process, an application to the Department of Employment and Training.
I have a question right there. There are offices that you can physically go to, but of course everything is done online these days, and we do see that there's a DLT.ri.gov or whatever, and I'm sure that's true in other states. Do you need to physically go to the place, or do you do it online, and does it make a difference?
Yeah, actually, I think at this point in time you're encouraged, if you have access to the internet, to do it online or by telephone, although I understand, given the nature of how many people are unemployed at this time, that it's very difficult to get through. There are offices, but if I were unemployed at this point in time, my starting place would be on the internet.
It would be. Mm-hmm. And is it a difficult application to fill out? What is the process?
Well, the application itself isn't, I wouldn't call it difficult. It's information that you would have readily available to you, and it'll get into some of the eligibility issues, but simply stated, it's where did you work, when did you leave, what were the reasons that you are now unemployed or separated
from your job.
Right. And then that starts the process in place. And what happens once that's set in place is it says in the statute the director will review it. Well, obviously, employees of the director of that department review it, and they contact your employer to find out from them what information they want to weigh in on as to why you're no longer working.
Who does qualify? If your job was eliminated or you were fired, what are the requirements? What's the eligibility?
Okay. The starting point, the first thing the director, so-called, or the person who's working and reviewing your application is going to look at is why you're now no longer working, and let's just call it a straight layoff to start with, because that's the simplest situation. And have you paid in to the has your employer
Has your employer
paid in, and have there been enough hours worked in the quarters prior to your being laid off that you're technically eligible? So in that type of situation, generally, once it's processed, you'll be eligible for unemployment after a short waiting period.
Has that changed in the recent situation where there, as we read now in Rhode Island alone, 19% unemployment? Because there's a backlog, is there now a longer wait?
The waiting period itself hasn't changed because the waiting period isn't referring to how long it takes you to get your unemployment. It's referring to the first week of unemployment they don't compensate you for.
Okay.
What happens is the timing of actually getting it does take much longer, and my understanding is if it takes an extended period of time, you will get your benefits retroactive. Right, to the point in time where you'd be eligible.
Okay. And how about the not so simple, David, when it's not just you've been laid off?
Okay. So we'll take what the procedure is next, and then we can go into some of the reasons why it may not be so simple. You apply, it's reviewed, and your application's been denied. What can you do? Well, the next step would be, and there's very short time frames on these steps, but the next step would be to file a claim for a hearing in front of a referee. And what would happen is, if you've been denied, you say, I appeal that you get a letter. I think it's like 10 days to appeal. You immediately let them know that you disagree with the decision and you want to have a hearing. So now you're brought in front of a referee.
Is that what they're called?
Yeah, they're called referees. And they sit there between you and your employer and they referee the issue. Not exactly, but I'll explain what happens there. But let me just go back one step. Why might you have that situation? Well, before you get to that situation, if there's any questions on your application, they'll call you up and do a telephone interview and ask you questions. You know, we see that you left because your employer changed your hours, let's say. And why is that a reason to leave, and tell us your side of the story. Then they'll call your employer up and ask them their side of the story. Now, if for some reason it's been determined that you're not eligible as the claimant, you can request this hearing in front of the referee, appeal. Okay? Now, your employer, if you get on, actually has the same right to request a hearing, to go to a referee. So if you've gotten on and your employer thinks you left for what would be called disqualifying reasons, then they can ask for a hearing in front of a referee. So the next step is you get in front of a referee. How does that work? And it's actually, it's an informal hearing. It's sort of like you present your testimony or evidence or witnesses or whatever you have that you want them to hear, and your employer presents its evidence. But they are recorded. And it's important that all the information you need to get out to the referee that you want the department to know about is presented, because that sort of creates the record upon which any future appeals are going to be based.
So that really does matter right up front. Now, I understand, and I guess it needs to be said here, you're speaking and addressing what happens in Rhode Island, and we need to point out, of course, that it varies from state to state,
right,
and we can't be all-encompassing with this. I think I did read that the appeal process in some cases had to be within 30 days, not 10, so I'm imagining
right,
that that happens in other states, different
levels have different
levels.
Appeal periods. And it may, in fact, remember, I started practicing in 1983, and I did a lot of unemployment law at the start of my practice. It's not something I do regularly now.
Yes.
So if anyone has any questions on exact periods and what applies to them throughout the course of this conversation, they ought to contact an attorney and ask those questions directly, because everyone's situation is going to be slightly different, and the period of time they have may differ from where they are at their particular level of appeal, and more importantly, what state they're in.
Interesting. I noticed that on some of the websites where there are opportunities to apply online, it would say, here's where you file, here's where you refile. Is that something that happens commonly, that you'd need to refile, and is that different from what someone would see if they needed to do the appeal?
Right. Well, the language I would use in Rhode Island wouldn't be